1 minute.
All right, Devin, may have to be up here then. What?
Yeah.
I'd like to call the July 27th monthly work session to order. First thing on the list is the Unite Us contract.
Hi, thank you guys so much. Can y'all hear me?
No. Is the light on?
How about now?
Is the light on?
Yes.
There you go.
There we go. It's on now. Okay. Good afternoon, board members and Dr. Asplin. Thank you guys so much for letting us be here. A couple months ago, you all had the opportunity to view the Unitas platform. Our representatives from Unitas did a demo for all of you, and we had one of our social workers, Jim Camello, just sharing a little bit about his experiences with service referrals and how the Unitas platform could revolutionize the way social workers work in the district. And at this time, I want to turn it over to Patrick. He has been working very hard on behalf of the school district to provide us some contractual updates. And then we are very fortunate, after Patrick shares those updates with you all, that we have 4 representatives from Unitas here that will be able to answer any follow-up questions that you all may have. I believe this item is on the agenda for approval tonight. So Patrick?
I think it's great that we're introducing, because there's a whole bunch of people we don't have.
You have a mic.
I'm glad that we're introducing, this was Deb Jackalone, Pupil Support Services.
Yep, Student
And-
Services.
And Student Services, and Patrick Duggan is the board attorney. And so if we could introduce everybody and what their position is when they start talking, that would be very helpful to us and the people at home.
You got it.
Thank you.
All right, Patrick Duggan, School Board Attorney.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. When I came on board at the school district, one of the first jobs I was tasked with was reviewing a series of contracts for the Unite Us platform. The Unite Us platform is a online platform that, for lack of a better way to describe it, it serves as a middleman between users and end users and connects students in the district to services in a more streamlined approach that is easier to navigate for the school district in ways such as connecting people by, eliminating phone calls and follow-ups and not being able to reach people. An online platform, the type of services it provides, facilitates the communication between the person in need and the people who fill those needs. Anytime you have an arrangement like that with an online platform, there's certain contractual requirements that come with, these type of services, and you worry about trading ease of access for legal liability sometimes. And sometimes if you make it too easy, you can have things like data breaches and things like that. So in the contracting perspective, which is my role as the lawyer, I look to make sure we limit the district's risk as much as possible in a way that still permits the, in this case, platform to be used and to make it a win-win where the district has as much reduction of possibility of liability as possible, yet still has the full benefit to the services. So with that objective and approach, I endeavored to negotiate with Unite Us. There was lots of back and forth on this, including on one of the provisions which involves indemnification. And indemnification is a legal topic where, for lack of a more complicated way to describe it, is if you get sued, we cover you for the liability in that lawsuit as a condition of doing business with you. Typically, I don't like to put the school district in a situation where we do indemnify people because it's taxpayer money and we need to be good shepherds of tax dollars. So generally speaking, when I'm reviewing contracts for the district, and I think when most lawyers are reviewing contracts for their clients, you try to avoid indemnification clauses. Sometimes, if you want to have the service bad enough, you agree to an indemnification clause, and oftentimes that decision is how much do you want the service versus how much risk are you taking on. And if you are going to agree to indemnify, you attempt to indemnify in as narrow a set of circumstances as you can. So that's what we did in this particular case, always looking out for the best interests and to reduce liability for the district. We negotiated with Unite Us, and they were, very generous in their negotiations, and we were able to, have a situation where they wanted us to indemnify them, but in exchange for the use of their services, but we did so in a manner where we were significantly able to reduce the scope of the indemnification and not be responsible for indemnifying them or covering them if they got sued for things such as third-party negligence, intentional acts, those type of things. So we were able to negotiate something since the last board workshop on this where the indemnification clause is at issue to something that is more risk-averse for the school district and for the board. And I had said before that anytime you enter into a contract, particularly with an indemnification clause, and you're sharing, information online in a manner with third parties, you lose some control over it, and there always is going to be some inherent risk built into that. I have been of the opinion that we have negotiated a contract that is as risk averse for the district as possible, and now that we went back to Unite Us and renegotiated the last portion of the contract to make some changes to that indemnification provision and make it a more narrow circumstance where we are willing to indemnify them, I continue to believe that the contract is now even more risk averse. Again, there's always some risk inherent in this type of thing, but I continue to believe that the pros far outweigh the cons, and the opportunity for there to be liability is significantly reduced, particularly if we have our parents execute a parental consent form. And I know there has been some discussion about what actual language needs to be included in that. That is not a part of the contract. That is an extra layer of protection that I have attempted to negotiate for the district to give additional protections beyond the contractual obligations that we have agreed to. And I am certainly happy if the board wishes to make changes to that document, and get that in a manner that the board deems best for this district. But the initial drafting of that particular document was geared towards limiting the risk and having a waiver by the parents that puts them on notice of all of the potential harms that could come with releasing information to a third party. And I think it adequately protects the district, but I am open to making revisions to it to make it as user-friendly for you all, my client, as necessary.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Patrick. We have with us from Unite Us platform, we have 4 representatives. We have Karina Kelly, we have Alexa Louise, we have Megan Deal, and Rodney Suttle. So at this time, I wanted to open it up to the board. If you all had any follow-up questions from the demo that you feel need to be answered by Unite Us platform before you actually have to make a decision tonight and when you cast your vote.
Bridget?
Thank you. Well, first, I want to thank Mr. Duggan. I know you worked very hard on this, and so I think you did a great job highlighting kind of where we were before, which had caused me some concern about the indemnification and the exposure it put us at. And then, I think we've certainly moved towards a more middle ground, but just for clarity, the way it's written now, in the event the Unite Us would not indemnify the district in the event there were any wrongful acts on their behalf in which we were also named in a suit. Is that correct?
So the indemnification provision requires us to indemnify Unite Us, and we would be indemnifying them, as I read it, only in the situation where our negligence is at play, which causes them liability. We were able to carve off, and they were agreeable to carve off the negligence and intentional acts of, others, such as end users and, such as their own users within their organization. So it went
Okay,
from
right.
a much broader opportunity where we were covering Unite Us if they are sued to a much more narrow set of circumstances when we are required to indemnify them for, others' wrongdoing, and much more limited to just mostly us.
Understood. So, and on the flip side, because, and I know we've talked about this, but for the discussion's sake, and my issue is more on the risk transfer and the exposure. I don't necessarily have specific questions about the platform or the usage of it, and I understand that there's this cost-benefit analysis of, as Patrick mentioned, how it streamlines some things and can assist in other areas, but there's an element of concern from a fiduciary standpoint of, particularly when we put things on a, web-based platform, and there's limited, if not any, we have no managerial control or operational control of a third party. So typically when we have any contract with any vendor, they indemnify the district so that in the event there is any wrongful, and this is all third parties, this is a very standard practice for us, that the third party would indemnify us of any of their own wrongful acts, because in the likelihood of a suit, let's just say there's a cyber breach or something of that sort, Unite Us would be named, and if it was as a result of the business of which was doing work with the Sarasota County School District, the Sarasota County School District would be named. And whether or not in the cost of defense is really where things start to get costly and a myriad of other things. And so our traditional contracts you don't see that. It's actually the other way around. And even to go as far as where you request to have the district listed as an additional insured so that there's proof that coverage in the event of any kind of claim or that the third party, the vendor, would be able to substantiate that. So that still, if I'm understanding correctly, is not in here, correct?
Well, one other thing I would like to add is that we are only indemnifying up to the statutory cap in the state of Florida, which is either $200,000 or $300,000, depending on the circumstances. So we looked into adding additional insurance as an additional layer of safety, and it was deemed that the costs for that insurance outweighed us at that price point. So was that your question?
No, I mean, I know that we talked about that. No, I think it's more the flip side. I mean, if we were to try to insure against it for any kind of exposure beyond the sovereign immunity of $200,000, $300,000, depending on how it is, it would likely not be covered for a couple of different reasons, but largely because the contract states that we would be owning that liability. So just again, going to natural business of things, and that's how this came to bear with the multiple conversations that Patrick and I have had, and certainly the superintendent, was I just wanted to make sure, to be fair to the board, that they understood the totality of whatever risk that we'd be taking on from a financial standpoint. From a operational standpoint, I don't know that I have any platform questions. I know that, one of the points was, how many other school districts are we in, or are they in? I believe we're the first in Florida, and I think that's accurate, but I don't want to say anything. But my concerns stem solely around some of the risk transfer aspects and the indemnification. And again, my hat's off to you, because I know you are trying to work with what best you can. But again, as traditional order of business, I don't see we don't enter into contracts in that manner of which we are. With such exposure, if you will. So again, the goal for me today was ultimately to make sure that our board members, out of fairness to them, had a full picture in evaluating the financial impact that you would be taking on in the approval of this contract.
So do you still have a problem with the contract, or?
In its current stat, yeah, I would not be supporting it merely only because of the current standpoint of there's no indemnification for us on their own wrongful acts. So if we were to be named in a suit, which is likely when you have a suit, they name everybody and anybody, and that's just how it works. So whether we are able to have it dismissed or not, there's a cost of defense incurred, which is very expensive. And so I see these for a living. That's what I do. I'm not an attorney, but I do it from the insurance side. And so that, to me, is where I had some concerns. There were some alarm bells. I am glad that it's better than it was before. But for me personally, and I just wanted to be fair to the board so that they had a clear picture of what
I think we understand.
Okay.
Did you have any response to that?
Just to clarify, we would, under this agreement, we would always be liable for our own wrongdoing.
Right.
There are very limited circumstances where we would be obligated to Unite Us for our own wrongdoing as well. And Unite Us would not ever be obligated for our own wrongdoing, but would be obligated for their own wrongdoing. The other thing I will add is another vendor in this area, Sarasota Memorial Hospital, also has engaged in a contract with Unite Us for a similar service. and they indicated to me, so since the last workshop, I also reached out to the lawyer from the hospital who indicated nothing but a good experience with Unite Us, and that they were able to negotiate, and they also agreed to similar contractual language that we did. So if nothing else, we stand in the same shoes as another public sector entity, Sarasota Memorial Hospital.
So we would be liable for our wrongdoing. Unite Us would be liable for their wrongdoing.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Rose?
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. I know that we've gone over this, and I appreciate everyone's time. For clarification for community members, since we're closing this out and bringing it as an agenda item to vote on, can we just quickly clarify any personal information that is on the Unite Us site? Does it include any therapeutic notes, anything of that nature? What specifically is on that site, and how long does it stay on there? Does it ever close out, or is it forever a record? So that is, in my world, as community has revisited this, knowing that we're voting on it, we've gone over it, but could we please clarify that again?
Sure. Can somebody from Unite Us take that question for the board? You guys responded to both Dr. Kingsley and I in writing, so I'd like you guys to clarify the information that is being put into Unite Us and how long it stays in there, and just the assurance that there is no information that is HIPAA protected or could ever get out.
Hi, everybody. This is Megan Deal. I'm the Florida State Director. We also have on the call, and I'm sorry we had to replace some of our attendees today. So we have Stephanie Harris, who is the Community Engagement Manager, Senior Engagement Manager for the region. And we also have Scott Guichard and Rodney Suttles on the call. But I'm going to let Stephanie weigh in on the particular question that you have asked.
So to address the question, the information that's put into the system is the information that you as a user would put in. So the specific information around the child and any, supporters of that child's case, whether it's a caregiver, anyone like that, their information can be captured. Once the case is closed, there is record so that you can refer back to it should you need to do so. But we are high trust, SOC 2, NIST, and FERPA certified. And Hipaa, I think somebody already mentioned Hipaa, but I think FERPA is probably a little more important to you all. So everything is very much protected. It's just that case information still available in the event you need to refer back to it. The only individuals that would have access to any of that information is a user that you give them access by sending a referral. So let's say you're sending a referral for the family to receive food from the food pantry. You could send that referral. The food pantry would be the only other organization seeing any of that information, and it's merely for the purpose of them contacting that client or that family to provide that service. Does that help answer that question?
It does, but you're saying information that we would feed into it, and the community members, I want to be as transparent as possible. And from my perspective, having been school-based, I know that we have students in great need, and in order to teach them academically, we have to provide, I feel we have to provide every asset resource to get those resources to them in the form of wraparound services. And with a number of staff members we have, that can be a legitimate challenge. In order to give assurances or clarity or transparency to families that sign the permission document, when you say the information that we feed in, is that could that be a diagnosis? And how long does that diagnosis stay in the system? Could it be counseling notes? How much private information particular to that student is captured, or are we simply doing a referral to agencies and that information is captured in a different way? How much personal information does the system retain on an individual student or family? And I don't want this to be, I need to say that I'm not saying this because I don't believe in the system. I know that we have students in need, and I am a strong advocate that we do everything we can to address those needs and in a responsible manner. But I also want our families to be clear that are concerned about their information potentially being out there on their child, their family. What could that possibly contain, and how long does it remain out there? Diagnoses change. Students become, our goal is more successful. So those, to me, were legitimate questions that I want to be transparent with, so that as we vote on this and go forward with it, it's in earnest of really supporting children and being transparent and clear with our families. I think that everything that we can do is a positive and an asset, but I have to recognize that this is a new venue, third party, and what can parents expect is out there in that cloud somewhere.
Yes, I completely understand and couldn't agree with you more. I have kids myself, so I can imagine how I'd feel if information is shared. But I also would want to ensure if there's an opportunity to connect my child to the services they need to ensure they're prepared to get the education they need, this tool is going to help make that happen. What we encourage all of our users, we discourage anyone from putting that personal health information in the system. There is a way for some providers to utilize the system for case management purposes. But if it's a clinical purpose, as you mentioned, therapy or counseling or anything that's mental behavioral health or physical health, legal, anything that's considered a sensitive topic, that file is going to be locked. So even if they keep separate notes, which there is a way to do that only that user at that organization would see those ever, the notes they put in, even for referrals, would be locked for you, for the school, for anybody else that is serving that client, that child. The only person that would even know that that child has been attached or sent a referral to a mental behavioral health or physical health services or anything like that would be the organization that sent the referral. And all they would see is that the referral was sent. The case manager at the school would go, okay, I sent this referral over here to Cornerstone. I'm going to throw that out there, but just because I know they're a provider in the general area, but they sent a referral. They know that the referral has been accepted, but outside of that, they're not going to see any activity, any notes, any personal information on that child's case.
So are those notes, excuse me, I'm sorry, are the notes on the system or are they not? Are the diagnosis, because what I hear you saying is that's a locked piece, and yes. That potentially, do we have protocol or processes and the expectations of how our staff's using it? Will there be occasions where that can occur? Because we've also talked about liability and breach at the same time that I'm going to be an incredibly strong advocate for this resource if it expedites wraparound services and all the services that are available and gives our staff more potential to help students. At the same time, I'm extraordinarily protective of our students and our families. And I guess I'm not getting to where I want to arrive, because I hear you saying that it is, if I'm correct, and that it is a locked system. We've talked about breach, we've talked about third party, and we discussed the protocol of what our staff will do? And again, I want to say I'm not against this. I'm for everything that can provide more support to get our students the ability for academics to be the primary piece of their life. But these are pieces that I've been questioned with by the community, and I'm accountable for where we go and how much I lead us into sharing that, because I think it's important. How long, how much, because it sounds like it exists, and how are we going to operate that piece and explain it to our families, and is it in the permission clearly that they'd be signing?
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Just to clarify, our social workers and homeschool liaisons would only be using the system for service referrals. So that would be only to connect a family with a service that they've indicated that they need. The service referral would also go along with a parental consent to make that referral to the required agency. None of our social workers or homeschool liaisons will be using this system for the purposes of case management services. And I don't know, Stephanie, if you wanted to respond to the other half, but I wanted to at least clarify that it is only for service referrals and to quickly and expeditiously connect students and families to services that they need that ultimately will benefit them in their educational or their academic setting.
Yes, it is definitely the information that is put in the system. It's only the required information, which is really first name, last name, and birth date. So no other information is required to be put in the system. We encourage contact information to be put in should, the referring agency have a way to contact that child or that family. In some cases, the case manager at the school or social work at the school may be that point of contact for the child.
Right.
So the only information that's required is the first name, last name, and birth date.
Stephanie, what we wanted to do, if this platform is adopted, our social workers have seen the platform and they weighed in that they felt this would be a valuable tool to help support their work. We would have ongoing and very in-depth professional development training with expectations set forth that every user would be required to participate in before ever using the system to make a referral. So that is part of our training and implementation plan should you all approve this platform.
And thank you. That was extraordinarily helpful and will provide clarity. And Mrs. Jackalone, can we expect in that process of professional development and so forth that you just described, that in writing, that protocol of not putting any more than the basic referral information would be our practices?
Awesome question. Yes, thank you. I don't know if all of you have had the opportunity to see it, but one thing our department has been working really hard on this year is developing very clear and concise procedures for how we operate. You all saw our flow chart for mental health referrals, and this would have a similar expectation, outlined exactly what the required steps are and how to use it. And each one of our social workers that participate in the professional development system would be required to sign up for the professional development. We'd have a record of how that looked, and they would be required to follow a protocol with specific expectations from me as their executive director that they are actually following those protocols.
In writing?
Absolutely. Everything we have is now in writing in one secure place.
And thank you very, very much. I appreciate the time and the clarification, and I will own the air. I just have one more piece because I missed it. How long does it stay in the system?
So, Stephanie, I don't know if you heard the question. They're trying to understand how long the information is retained in the Unitas platform.
So to my knowledge, the information stays, that name and birth date stays in the system even as a closed case. I can consult with our team, our product team, to see if there is a way for it to be eradicated, for it to go away. But to my understanding, it does stay, and it's recognized with the name and the birth date.
Okay.
And that information can be closed, but again, it would only be accessible to the person that put that information in the system.
So you're saying it doesn't ever close, it's always retained even after it's closed?
It's a closed case, but that information stays in because maybe the child received services when they were in the first grade, and then they received services again when they were in the sixth grade. So that's two different social workers, many years apart. When they put that name and birth date in, that child would populate. They wouldn't see all the history because they don't have access to that information, but that name and the birth date is the only thing that is captured and is still visible to them. If it was the same social worker, then they would see their old history.
And I understand that.
That's serving that.
I understand that, and I recognize the benefits of it. The questions that came to me are when I'm a 24-year-old and a 28-year-old, or for that matter, a 19-year-old trying to gain employment in the challenges I faced as a child. And yes, it's all clear now. And from my standpoint, it's weighing out providing resources to having complete clarity with parents as they sign that permission slip with the things that I'm addressing, and getting our children the support they need to be academically successful. Thank you, Mrs. Brown, for your patience.
So that last part. So you were asking if a student who had had services, and then when he's 19, 20, 23 is going out to get for a job, you're trying to find out if that potential employee has access to this record?
I'm addressing questions that came to me from community members, knowing that we're voting on this.
All right. Okay.
And also,
All right.
well,
So
can I finish, please?
Well, we're running late. You answered my question.
And recognizing that I've spent a career teaching students that what they put online is something they're going to live with, that it's not all controlled.
So, again, this is only accessible to our social workers and those people who have access to it, and the information that the psychologist or whoever the treating person is, they have access to their information, but even our social workers don't have access to that information. That's not put out here, and it isn't like putting things out there on Facebook. I mean, unless this child puts things out there on Facebook as what he did, but it's just like all your other medical records. They have some protections out there. Tom.
So I just want to remind everybody that I'm listening to the recommendation of our mental health professionals who bring us a great idea, and I appreciate that we have oversight and we're doing the right things and asking the right questions. But I have to trust our team that they wouldn't have brought us something that hadn't been vetted every which way from Sunday, that would in fact bring the services to our troubled youth sooner and better and faster. So I'm going to start there. Secondly, my next question is to unite us. Have you been involved in breach litigation?
I'll go ahead and take that. And no, to my knowledge, we haven't been. I can't answer that with 100% accuracy, but I can definitely confirm that.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, I can have that confirmed and get back to you to make sure that that's accurate.
Okay, and then lastly, I don't see all of the people who could answer this question for me, but maybe Dr. Asplund. We work with many third-party providers here at the school district, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And have we experienced a breach?
I don't think we have. Deb, have you ever had a breach with any of the agencies?
I'm not familiar with any. Amy, I don't know. You've been here a long time.
Not to my knowledge in the past 15 years.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Bridget?
I'm just going to summarize because I know we are tight on time and we have different topics. But just kind of going back to Mrs. Rose's points, and two things. So the items that are in there are, I know that the minimum is first name, last name, and date of birth, all of which are personal identifiable information. So it's PII, so period. So, and it's out there, and breaches are real, whether or not we've experienced or not. They are real, and they're happening more often than I wish they were. So we do have to take it seriously. And so understanding what those controls are, I know the example was utilized with, if there was, from a food bank. I mean, so that's not as sensitive information, but are we utilizing this for mental health referrals? I thought we would be.
So traditionally, our mental health providers that we contract with are First Step. They are our providers for all of our students in our elementary schools. First Step is Sarasota, does our middle schools and high schools. So always our first line of defense for referral services is through our school-based mental health providers. And then additionally, we activate our additional community mental health providers by agencies in which we have a mental health interagency agreement with the district. So that's places like Centerstone, JFCS. So that is a conversation that could be had if we want to use this system to make additional referrals. Some of those providers are also part of this platform. But traditionally, we go with our school-based contractors.
Okay, so the intent of this is not to be utilizing it for any kind of mental health. Again, and I know there's personal identifying information in the other ones, but I think the severity and the concern is, if it is in there and there is sensitive information and the case is closed, but there's a breach, that's housed somewhere. I think that's to her point of what people could be concerned about. And so understanding those controls, and that's where I go back to the contract of saying, we have limited oversight on operations. So I don't know, and I'm sure we did due diligence, but even the contractual aspect was concerning to me. But in real life, when we're talking about that, are we using it for mental health referrals? Because you can start to see the severity or the significance of the information that's in there. And because I see the value, but I also need to make sure we have those controls in place. That's why, I want to make it very clear that we would likely or potentially could be using it for mental health referrals as well.
That would not be a primary function, but it could be used for that platform.
Okay.
Yes.
And so finally, my two questions for Unite Us are, are you guys, are you health record certified? I know when you deal with sensitive information, and I know you worked with the SMH, so with Hipaa or FERPA?
Yeah, so we will, and I know we had sent this language over earlier, but we are High Trust SOC 2 Type 2 and NIST certified. We follow all the highest security frameworks in the industry. We are HIPAA compliant, speaking to medical records. We are FERPA compliant, and we follow all the strictest federal privacy regulations, including 42 CFR Part 2.
And so we reviewed your SOC 2 report during this?
I don't believe that was requested.
Do you have one?
I can ask for it.
Okay. And just for a note, this is on next week. This is August 3rd. It's not on tonight's, just for clarity. But that's all. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I would think, you talk about all these breaches that are out there, your doctor's offices could be breached. And although I would think they'd be more likely to breach the hospital where they could get more information, credit card numbers and everything else, than accessing these files. So there's no way anybody can guarantee 100% no breach. But I think when you look at where somebody might want to breach, I think they would be pretty low down on the list. I would think Sarasota Memorial would be a much higher breach, or your banks, or some of those other things. But knowing that you're certified and that you understand the importance of keeping these records safe as we can, and I'm sure if new things come out, you'll update your safety procedures. Ms. Goodwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that I will be supporting this. I think it's great for our school district. I think it's great for our students. I've had a number of schools who have mentioned to me that they're really excited about it because it's a time saver and it really gets services to our students hopefully much faster, and it gives us that wonderful running record of what we're doing. And I know that in the past we've had all kinds of systems, manual and otherwise, that really cripple the work of social workers because they're in the office dialing, trying to find help. So I think this is a really good thing. I had a visit with somebody at a school yesterday, and they were most excited about this and talked about it with me at length. So I will be supporting it.
Thank you.
Mr. Edwards.
Lastly, I too will be supporting it, but I do have issues with the consent form, and I want to go on the record of saying that, so I would like input on that before it's finalized.
Thank you. I see no more requests from the board. Did you have all these wonderful people here to...
That's for part two. Oops, am I out? Yep, I'm on. That's for part two. That's for us just to go over the school-based mental health services that we provide. So if we're good, we're ready to jump to the PowerPoint.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks. Is it ready, Jamal? Thank you to all of us Unitas partners for being here. You're more than welcome to stay on and listen, but if not, thank you so much for your time and for your valuable input that you provided to our community and our board members today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just stay and listen a little bit to learn a little bit more about your programs, if I'm welcome.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So one of our goals today was just to share some additional information with you all about our school-based student services team and our partnership with some of our mental health agencies. We have First Step with us today. So before I start, I do want to thank all of you all for your questions, for the time that you've spent talking with me, doing your research, and providing input to us as we try to best support our students in the district. It is really appreciative. I'm a learner, I'm a grower. Our team strives for excellence, and we are truly appreciative of the support that you all have offered to us thus far. So today I have some of our most fabulous student service team professionals with us, and they're going to share a little bit with you about their role in student support and how they provide school-based mental health services to our students. And I'm going to be very quick since we are behind schedule. The very first person that I have with us is our lead school psychologist. Her name is Krista Nelson. She has 23 years experience as a school psychologist, and she is also a licensed school psychologist. She has tremendous expertise in the area of student support, particularly in evaluating students and identifying and helping with the implementation of academic and behavioral interventions. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Krista.
Thanks. Should I grab this?
Yeah.
Thank you. And I feel really privileged to be a part of the 23 school psychologists in Sarasota County. I've worked in other areas in other states before, and I really feel like we have the best team. And I trust these people with my own child, and that says a lot of how much I value our team and how great I think they are. But as you know, for school psychology, a lot of what we do is just helping students with learning, and we're focusing mostly on academic and behavior strategies. Sometimes we do that like systematically with classrooms and with the whole school based from a different perspective, but most of the time we're spent focusing on individual students. Our primary role is psychoeducational evaluations, and those are evaluations that can lead to exceptional education eligibility or ineligibility at times, but regardless of whether they're eligible or not eligible, we're trying to help that student meet their needs in the classroom academically. Another thing that we do are behavior intervention plans for some of our students that have behavior interfering with their learning in the classroom. And we work really intensely with those students that are more severe. We're part of the school-based threat assessment team. When the school has a threat, we're called in to help be a part of that team just to provide a different perspective. And we also do counseling as a related service. Counseling as a related service is something that is on a student's individual education plan, and the purpose of that is to allow the child to access their education. So when we do that, we sit in an individual education plan meeting with the parents. The parents sign the plan, and we are working specifically for a goal that's on the IEP. We aren't working on extraneous things where it's the whole purpose is this is what's hindering the child from accessing their education, and that's what we're working on. So I wanted to make it really quick. I could talk for hours about my field because I love it, but I will let us go to the rest of the group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Krista. Next up, we have Amy Villemore. She is one of our social workers. She has tremendous expertise. She is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to community resources and providing those wraparound services that parents need to help their student be successful in school. She is a master level social worker, and she is also a licensed clinical social worker who has been in the field of social work for over 23 years. So I'm going to turn it away to Amy.
Thanks, Deb. Thank you for having me today, and it's so exciting. Can you hear me? Okay. It's so exciting to hear social work being talked about because it's been my wheelhouse for a long, long time. So our role in schools, we team with our school psychologists, with our SLPs, school-wide support. We discuss the whole child and what are some of the concerns that are getting in the way of them accessing their education. So if it's a concern on the home base or mental health or a medical need, I get pulled in or we get pulled in and start to problem solve around that issue. Do I need to be the person to reach out regarding a medical concern, a mental health concern? Does the family need resources that I can help access for them? So that's what we do as school social workers, in addition to conduct evaluations. Our parents are our primary partners in those evaluations. We're getting the info from the home and the parent with regard to functioning of the student and any concerns or medical issues the child might have. We also do counseling as a related service, again, to support the IEP goal exclusively. And I know we discussed concerns about or Mrs. Ziegler raised a concern, which is valid, about information being shared with a third-party vendor. If we were to make a referral, we are not including any diagnostic information because we do not diagnose in the school district. We may have knowledge of it, as a parent might put it in InfoSnap, like my child has ADHD or asthma, or allergies, whatever. That would not be included in that information, just like when I assist a parent in accessing a community resource for any reason, I'm giving them contact information and the parent is pursuing it. It's not on the back end. I'm not calling the agency and asking them to contact the parent. That's not how we work. So just to kind of clarify that. Mm-hmm.
You're so good. Thank you, Miss Amy. We appreciate it. Next on our Student Support Services team is Miss Penny Reedinger. Penny is a certified school counselor, and she comes to the table with tremendous expertise. She is one of our youth mental health first aid trainers. She's also a gatekeeper trainer. She provides all of the gatekeeper training for our school counselors, our social workers, our school psychologists, even our SROs. She comes to us with, in her words, not mine, decades of experience. So I'm going to turn it over to Miss Penny.
Yes, decades indeed. So good afternoon. Happy to see you all. School counselors are based at the school, unlike the social workers and the school psychologists. So I always think of the school counselors as being the triage spot. Whatever problem might arise, whether it be in the classroom, on the campus, wherever it may be, that information gets referred to the school counselor. The school counselor then can make that determination. Who do I refer to? What school-wide support team members do we need to call in and talk about that student? Also, if you look at the PowerPoint, that Tier 1 level would be for all of us providing student services, what we do for all students, whether it be elementary, middle, or high school. And it may be character education, it may be career and post-secondary planning, depending on the level that we're talking about. When we get into that Tier 2, now we're looking at students who need more support, more help, and small group provisions are given to those students. That third tier is when we do get down to the individual student who needs that one-on-one support. So you will see this triangle many, many times because that is our student service model. The school counselors are going to take those referrals whenever we hear about bullying, or there are academic needs, or the parent calls in with some request, whatever that may be. The school counselor is usually the one that will be the problem solver for that school. So we're certainly happy to be there from, the first thing in the morning to last thing in the afternoon, and sometimes beyond, depending on those parent meetings or whatever the needs are of the student. So we're very happy with our school counselors.
Are you part of that group that would come in if in fact, there's a student that may be talking about suicide or something, or whether we need to Baker Act somebody before we do that? Would you be included in that assessment?
Usually that is a school-based team.
Well, yeah, I didn't mean you
right
personally,
there.
but the school psychologist and counselor.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct. And then we also, when we have issues that arise at a school with a student, we certainly have student service team that will go into the school, to provide triage, help, support with staff and students.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. So you all may have noticed on these last three presentations between Krista and Amy and Penny, there was a big yellow star that said educationally relevant services. So everything this side of this table does has to do with helping students be educationally successful in their academic and social endeavors. On the other side of the coin, who is a tremendous partner to us, are our school-based mental health therapists. And I am super proud to introduce Tracy Whedon. She has more initials behind her name than almost anybody I've come into contact with. She has 23 years experience in the behavioral health field. She has 10 years experience managing school-based teams. She's solely responsible for 42 programs at First Step of Sarasota. She's a master social worker, a licensed clinical social worker. She's a clinical intern supervisor. And if that wasn't enough, she's in a doctoral program to get her doctorate degree in business administration. But Tracy, I'm hoping today you can share a little bit about the clinical services that our mental health providers provide in our schools.
Yes. Thanks, Deb, and thank you all. Can you hear me? Okay. You know, I don't realize the alphabet soup until someone else says it. So at First Step Sarasota, we have integrated mental health therapists who are master's level.
I'm sorry. I think Deb's mic wasn't on. Deb, would you introduce her without all the things, but just what her name is and who she represents?
Okay, so this is Tracy Whedon, and she is the Chief Operating Officer at First Step, and she helps us with our school-based mental health providers.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you. So our mental health therapists are integrated into the middle and high schools, and they are master's level licensed or registered interns, which licensed in mental health counseling or licensed in clinical social work, or registered, meaning that they are under supervision of a licensed professional to become licensed in the field of mental health counseling. And so they provide psychotherapy essentially on site to students who may be struggling emotionally due to depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, family distress, a host of social issues. And so the referrals to that program are actually triggered by the school-based educational team. And so when a student is identified to be experiencing hardships in their learning activities, then the school team that we just heard from, who is amazing, will get together and make that referral so that the student can receive more intensive but integrated, so it's not taking the student outside of the school services. During that process, we are a clinical behavioral health organization. We are accredited to provide the services that we do. And so at each encounter, a consent from the family or caregiver is required. So that family or caregiver has to agree to us providing that service, has to sign off that they understand the privacy and confidentiality over the services, regarding the services that we are providing, and the student has to be willing and able to participate in that service. And I don't know if there's any questions, but that's pretty much what we do.
Thank you so much. And if you noticed on your PowerPoints, Tracy's star was blue because they are really focused on that clinical therapeutic service to help students be successful. So thank you. I don't know if the board has any specific questions for these great student staff members, or if you have any questions in general that we need to help answer so you can make informed decisions.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Well done, and I thank you all for explaining everything. I think is extraordinarily helpful. Great plan. I'm in full support of it. I have one question, and since we have the benefit of having the whole team here, and we talked about the tiers of intervention, which are prevention, intervention initiatives, and a team providing those interventions to a student. At what point do we do academic testing and or cognitive testing to look at long-term, short-term memory, those kinds of things, so that those tiers of intervention are best aligned? How far does a student go without intervention working before we look at the needs specifically through assessment or screening of that student?
We do things a few different ways. We work with the teachers.
Is the mic on?
Is
Okay.
it on? I think so. We work with teachers to use a striving reader plan a lot to re-guide them back towards that to help with interventions, because they can do that really efficiently because they have just a few kids versus more than one school. We also do some testing in between tier 2 and tier 3 if the teachers need more assistance to help guide the tier 3 interventions. And we do that with a notice of intervention assessment for consent. And then also, we also can do testing after tier 3 interventions if they haven't been successful at a care team meeting where a parent would sign an informed consent requesting any of the testing, and we would discuss all of that at that meeting.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well done. Thank you. Like that answer.
Mr. Edwards?
So, first question to everyone: do you have enough hours in the day? I mean, there's so much work to be done with our students. That's been my concern since I got here, and I know that we're getting 7 more professionals from First Step. I know that was in, and that has to do with. And I'm going to put Deb on the hot spot for a second. We used to get $1.5 million in an allocation for mental health services, correct?
Yes, a couple years ago, we started receiving a mental health allocation from the state. Last year, we were awarded about $1.5 million. 15% of that went to the charter schools. This year, we received a small increase, and we received $1.7 million from the state. And we gave 15% of that to the charter schools as well to support mental health.
So just so that we're staying on the same page, 1.7 less 15% for 44,000 students goes not too far. So I just want to, while we're in this space, acknowledge our generous supporters from the community and the foundations, because that's how we're able to afford these kinds of services and those additional 7 people. So I think it's important that we say that. The last thing that I want to point out, and I hate to sound like a cheerleader in this particular case, but I noticed that everybody was talking about parental consent forms and involving the families, and we've spent so much time talking about how we're not doing that. We really are, and I want to just make sure that the community understands how important the relationship is for our students with their families, not against their families. So thank you for bringing that to all of our attention.
Bridget?
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you for coming back, everyone, and for giving us more detail and to that point of knowing that there were questions out there, and I know that there are processes in place, but to ensure that we are able to share what those are, where those differences are from the academic and behavioral standpoint, and where those clinical elements come in and how we contract out. So I appreciate, and I thank you for reaching out to get kind of some clarity of how to answer those questions, because we do have processes in place. We just want to ensure that the community that is the case. And you mentioned something earlier, and so thank you for the flow chart, because that helps me a lot figure out how this, how that works. But when it comes to training and processes, I know you mentioned a little bit about that before, but is that something you can quickly dive into, kind of what to make sure that everyone understands what those processes are, how important they are? Because to Mr. Edwards' point, exactly, we do understand how important the family is in this, and we do include them, so I do know that. But can you speak to the training side of it a little bit?
Absolutely. And thank you very much, Mr. Edwards, for recognizing what our school district does in addition to that mental health allocation, and along with our community foundations and other grants that we get. We definitely could not do this work without them. So thank you for that. And thank you for recognizing just how hard our staff and our provider partners are working every day to meet the needs of our students. Every year, I just sent this out to our team yesterday. We have a robust professional learning calendar that we provide. So at the start of the school year, all of our teams are trained in professional development with regard to suicide intervention and suicidal ideation, how to assess students that may be experiencing suicidal ideation or self-harm. We also have our whole entire student services team trained in youth mental health first aid. We are adopting a new robust system that helps with our threat assessment and our mental health referral data. We have annual training on those processes as well. We have monthly trainings for all of our social workers, all of our counselors, and all of our school psychologists with particular focuses that we determine each month based on data and needs within our schools. So the training is ongoing. It is led by professionals in the area of expertise, and all of our staff is required to participate in these monthly and annual required trainings.
Thank you. Ms. Goodwin?
I, too, would like to say thank you for all of this hard work, and I know that you have reorganized the department, Deb, in the last few months, and I think that all of the people that you have here today that are working together as a team is very impressive. In terms of charter schools, we are in charge of the charter schools plan for mental health. Is that correct? This was not always the case, correct?
Right. Charter schools, actually, they write their own plans.
Right.
And we have to review and make sure their plans have the required elements, and then we submit those with our plan. This year, what's new in our mental health allocation plan is the youth mental health first aid training, which is a statutory requirement. All of the charter schools in Sarasota have opted to participate in our training and professional development. So we have weekly trainings. Penny is actually one of our youth mental health first aid trainers, and she is out and about on a regular basis providing those trainings. But all of our charter schools will participate in the district's training plan to reach the goal of 100% of staff being trained.
I thought that was the case. I have attended Penny's class before, and was very impressed because it really offered a lot of good tips to just anytime you're talking to a young adult or a youngster, get some really good tips on how to listen and really pick up on some things that might not be going well. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you've done. Thank First Steph for being our great partner. Thank Tom and sheriff, the former sheriff, for his hard work this year with First Step, and I think we're making strides, and I think we've got a good team together. This is the most important aspect, I think, of our students' lives since Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. I think we've recognized that, and then when we had the pandemic, this caused a lot. More angst, and a lot of students are really in need of our services. So thank you all.
Yes, I'd like to thank you too for all you've done. We really appreciate pulling this all together. And there's a reason why the state is putting these dollars in. Those dollars from the state came after that shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, because they understand, or they got somebody to understand up in Tallahassee, that in order to prevent these shootings, it's not just about the gun, but it's about the shooter and the problems that shooter may be experiencing. And if we can get in there and work with that student before it explodes, before it's beyond his or her control, and not just the shooter, but the one looking at suicide, or, everyone wants our children to be safe and healthy and happy. And sometimes parents don't know how. Sometimes your parents might be the problem. I mean, we've got, parents, that are trying to help, or parents that are still struggling with their own drug addictions or whatever. And sometimes, we can help them too through this, because you're getting family counseling in this also. But whatever the problem, we need to be there to help as much as we can, so that we can, prevent a Marjorie Stoneman Douglas from happening here, prevent these suicides that we experienced, several 1 year ago. There's like 3 or 4 suicides that we had in our schools. That was rough. And that's not good for our school, that's not good for our students, and it's surely not good for those families. And so I think what we're doing here, not only for the students but for the families, is remarkable, and getting those students as easily as possible without having to go through so much staff time, because that's been taking up a lot of problem. But as we can get it through the system and get the services to these kids or to the families as if we can do it in the school without having to call in the professionals, that's wonderful. And I really appreciate all you've been doing. Oh, I see Karen wants to talk again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. I just want to point out to the community that Student Services has put all of this information, and it's very thorough, all the resources, and completely explains what our Student Services does for our students as a team on our website, and that is available to you. And I thank you for doing that work and appreciate it very much, and want to make sure our community knows it's accessible much more than what we've talked about today. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for our communications department for updating our website with more and more information. Now, I think we're done with number one. Number two is the parent permission process, and I see some of you same people are here. So do we have, is there a presentation or discussion on the parent permission?
No, I just wanted to make sure. If y'all had any questions, I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to ask, but there's no special presentation for that.
And we wanted to make sure that before these contracted services were done, before we did the referrals, that parents had to sign a permission before. Okay, so I guess we'll pull both of these things together, and that brings up our time better. All right, thank you again. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you all so much.
And for all the work you're going to be doing in the next year.
Yeah, thank you all for your support and time.
All right. Thank you, Deb. Thank you to your team. Mr. Knight, thank you. Appreciate it. And Stephanie, thank you. First step. Our next item is our policy for IEP meetings for recording and non-recording. If you recall, back in June, there was a question about recording IEP meetings or not recording IEP meetings, and I said I would get some information together and bring that to you at a workshop so that we could discuss it. I had Patrick Duggan create 3 different types of policies to kind of cover across the board: recording situation, a non-recording situation, and then another somewhat in the middle. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Patrick. If you could explain the policies that we have here. What we're looking for today is really discussion to see if we want to stick close to the law or be as permissive as possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Okay. Excuse me, before we turn it over to Patrick, could you give us an overview of an IEP meeting? Who's there, who calls it, and how often they are?
Yes, so IEP meetings are at the school level. The ESE liaison is there, teachers are there, there's usually...
And this is our first time we're talking about it, people at home. Individual education plan is an IEP, and ESE is education...
Exceptional student education.
Exceptional student education. Okay, good.
So when there is a meeting that is requested at the school level, parents are invited and teachers are there. The ESE liaison is there, psychologists, other folks who may need to be in the room to discuss the student and the disability and what accommodations might be needed. And during that meeting, a decision is made about what accommodations are needed. And during that meeting, the information is written. It's written and explained, discussed, and signed by everyone in the room, including the parent. And then at that point, it's delivered, obviously to the teachers to provide those accommodations for the student.
And I think after the DJ case, we talked about we are having training for parents. Is that happening yet? Or are any parents taking advantage of it?
Yes. Tammy, can you come to the podium, please? Tammy Castles, our director of ESE, will be up here to answer the question. Yes.
Yeah, just go ahead and sit down.
Hi, good afternoon. Nice to see all of you. I'm Tammy Castles. I'm the ESE Director here in Sarasota County. Hi. So could you please repeat the question, if you don't mind? Thank you.
I wanted to know if we're having this training for the parents, and are many parents taking advantage of it?
Yes, ma'am. We do have monthly trainings. Sometimes we have trainings that occur twice a month. And we do have parents who are taking advantage of the trainings. That's been a little bit increased since we've started. As we have continued to do the trainings, for parents that have not attended trainings, we send PowerPoints to the parents in order to make sure that they still receive the information. And then if there's a need for an explanation, then we provide that information as well as a follow-up.
Thank you.
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Mr. Duggan, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so as the superintendent said, I was tasked with drafting 3 different policies. As I understand how these meetings work now, they generally in the state, in our district, are not recorded. From an informal polling of other school districts around the state, it seemed that while I did not receive an answer from each district, the majority of the school districts do it similar to the way we do it, where the meetings are generally not recorded. Now, there are times when we are legally required to record IEP meetings, and that is when the student has a disability, and recording the meeting will permit the student or the family to meaningfully participate, make informed decisions, and really understand the process better. So with that being said, we are not required to record, and we are not prohibited from recording. So the board has a lot of discretion, and some of those decisions are based on what, the role and what the intended benefit and outcome we seek are, and what roles and responsibilities and how that impacts each of the various stakeholders, parents, students, teachers, who all have to collaborate in one of these meetings to come up with a game plan that is in the best interest of our students in the educational process. So with that being said, I drafted one of the policies to generally prohibit recording except for when we're required by law. I would say that's the one that's the closest to what currently is occurring in the district, albeit without a policy. I drafted one that more broadly permits recording upon parental consent. There weren't not very many districts around the state that chose to do it that way, although one of them that does it that way is Manatee County, just to our north. I understand that was part of some type of legal settlement that they agreed to do it that way. I don't know the details, but that's why they do it that way there. And then I attempted to come up with some type of middle ground where we did it only when legally required or upon consent of all of the participants, which sounds easy, but in practice, when you consider that people could refuse to consent and certain people are required to participate, given the volume of over 8,000 IEPs that we do per year, I think that one is doable, but would be the most cumbersome of the 3 policies. I have no preference for either one of them. I think there are policy issues that you would need to vet through and just decide as a group what approach you want to take to this. And I will lastly say I think we legally can have a policy for each of these things. I think under different versions of what the finished product ends up being, we have an obligation to bargain with our unions. To what extent we can impose thereafter and what their stance is, I don't know. But that is something that certainly will have to be considered depending on which route the board goes. We're prepared to do that if that's necessary, but I want to point that out. I think certainly under the second policy that requires consent of teachers, and certainly under the third policy where it is upon parental request, that would be a change in the current status quo, which would require bargaining under our existing collective bargaining agreements.
Is there any expectation of anyone that you will be recorded, or is there an expectation in law that you are not supposed to be recorded unless you give your permission?
Okay, so the recording of people is different in all 50 states. They generally have 2 frameworks in the various states, one that permits recording based on one person to the conversation's consent, The other that permits recording requiring both parties to the conversation to consent. The state of Florida is what's called a dual consent state. So when those laws are triggered, generally the consent of both parties is required. In the state of Florida, they do it different than in some other states, though, and those obligations to obtain consent of both parties to the conversation are triggered only when there is an expectation that someone's not being recorded. Other people describe that as an expectation of privacy in the conversation or an expectation that the conversation is private. When those circumstances do not exist, there is no need to have consent. In the context of an IEP meeting, if we had a policy that was implemented that called for recording, and if the policy was followed, meaning the parent requested it, and the other people who were participants in that conversation, were aware of the policy and were aware of the request, given that there are sometimes, in excess of 5 people, sometimes up to 10 people in those meetings, I would be hard-pressed to say that would be a situation when there's a policy, when everyone's aware of the request, and when there are multiple participants, to say that that would be a private, an expectation that that conversation's private. So I would say that in that circumstance, with the existence of a policy and, it wasn't surreptitiously recorded, for example, that it would not be legally prohibited to record that encounter. Now, that being said, I do think we have other legal obligations, such as bargaining with the union over those things, and that may pose ultimately a barrier to implementing these policies, depending on what route we go. But I do think technically, in that situation, I would be hard-pressed to say that's a private conversation that would garner the protections of Chapter 934 of the Florida statutes, which is the dual consent chapter of the Florida statutes.
Ms. Ziegler.
Thank you, and thank you again to Mr. Duggan for the work on this. I appreciate it. So I'm going to kind of overview some things, and I believe this is a really important topic, and to me, I really thought it was a no-brainer, especially hinging off of a number of items that I think this district is working to rebuild trust, to ensure transparency, and to really ensure a positive outcome for both for the student at the center of it, but also for our staff who work very, very hard in very complex situations, and for parents who are working very hard and very passionate about trying to find the appropriate services or accommodations for their child in a world that is very different probably than what educators necessarily understand. And so I appreciate the fact that you were able to highlight what does that room look like? And it's not, and I want to start where this is not this shouldn't come from a combative area. It should be seen as an opportunity. And that's to my knowledge is that why in the past, when a recording has been requested, it was granted. But if you just consider, yes, we have 8,000 plus IEPs, many of which work forward without incident and are executed accordingly and managed just fine. Sometimes there are ones that aren't, and then but either way, when someone is asking to record, I think for me as a parent, when you consider yourself in there, and again, I'm coming to it at the viewpoint that every single person in that room has the desire to assist that child and provide the necessary services. But it is daunting as a parent to walk in. It's emotional because it's your child. It's challenging because some of these things are challenging to overcome. And you have a number of different, and there's an element of it that's very procedural. I mean, there is an element of almost anxiety or concern, and even when I know everyone around that table is intending to bring their best foot forward and say what they mean and mean what they say, it can be overwhelming. And so I think it affords, a family an opportunity to go back and review it as they move forward. It's not intended to be a gotcha, but it really is intended to balance the scales, but also elevate the quality of that meeting for all involved. Because if there are disputes on either end, well, now we have an opportunity to review that and ensure, because that does sometimes happen when there are disputes about what was said. I know the typical practice is that sometimes that you would write notes, we have both parties sign and move forward. But there have been times where there are either disputes about what was written, or we don't get a signature on that very day. I'm sure it's rare. It does certainly happen. And sometimes you can have 6 different people saying different things. And as a parent, I can imagine listening and then thinking about how to respond. And sometimes you can miss it. Even on the board table, sometimes I go back and rewatch the meetings because I want to make sure I can reflect and see what everyone said, because there are times that you miss that because you're thinking about what you're going to say, or there's a lot of things going on. So those dynamics are real. And so to me, it is a win-win all around, especially in the world in which we are trying to move past and be a leader in the ESC department, where I know Dr. Asplund and I have spoken about this as it comes to the result of what's transpired after the DJ case and the sanctions that have been put upon us from the state of the Department of Florida, or Department of Education. And so, in recognizing, and these aren't my words, but that many counties don't do ESC great. And so when I think about looking at what other districts do, when I believe it's been set up here a couple times that we want to be the leader about how to do things, well, then I think we lead and we don't necessarily look at what other districts are doing if we don't think that they're necessarily doing it right. I think we look at what is going to be the best opportunity for us to serve our families and our students and our staff. And so for me, I think, and I believe, like I said, I think it's a no-brainer, and I think it's a win-win for everyone, and it really does show a good faith effort to move forward and raise the bar that we are going to take this head on and have positive outcomes. The final part that I wanted to talk to more on the procedural aspect is, because I understand, as it was noted and Mr. Duggan just mentioned, as far as the impact it would have with our current collection CBA, and that the status quo would run. And so when I read through this, that draft 1 policy calls for recording of IEP meetings to be limited to only when we are required to do so by law. This is essentially what we are doing currently doing now, albeit without a policy. Now, I recognize that's based on the information that you were provided. So my question is, when we say do, and this is for first Mr. Duggan and then Mrs. Castle. So if we have, if required to do so by law, when you say that that's as far as to respond to any kind of disability or anything of the sorts like that, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that was my understanding when I put this document together. The summary document is my words, based on my understanding.
Right.
Since we have spoken about that, I understand there are some other more limited times when we have recorded when everyone is in agreement.
Okay, so I guess that could go into my question, because that's important. When we think about the status quo, we think about not, is every single one recorded? No, but the question is, when it's been requested, do we honor that? And that's where I go to the status quo, and where I've heard from many people who work in the district. I know I brought it up here previously, and it was stated it was a long practice in this district that it would be accommodated. So can you clarify, just because I think that's as I prepared for today and heard and read certain things, it appeared that was as a hurdle, and so I really want to narrow in onto the status quo as what's transpired in the last 20 years, 10 years, 5 years. We'll keep going, but however you'd like to address that.
Well, I've only been here 7, 8, so I'll try my best. So basically, when I came here, actually, it was, the status quo was that if a parent did request a recording, that, we did follow up and we did do that. If a parent requested a recording, we would also record as a school district, and that's what took place there. I think more recently, there have been some concerns, I think, that teachers have not wanted to be recorded. And I think in an effort to support our teachers when they're uncomfortable in certain situations, I think that we just wanted to make sure that we were addressing those concerns. And as long as we could be transparent and write the notes and make sure that the notes were kept, I think that that's the route that we have taken. Recently.
Right, thank you. And a follow-up, because I do have a couple questions, and then I'll yield the floor. So in that circumstance, because I recognize I want to support staff as well, so in the instance that there's a reason they don't feel comfortable to be recorded, is it a possibility that they would not have to be in that meeting and they could provide their own notes in a written format?
That is a possibility, except when you think about, when you think about a student with special needs, we have an obligation to make sure that we bring all of the teachers, all of the personnel at the table that could make some decisions and really participate in the problem-solving process. And providing notes is one way, but really being engaged in the problem-solving process is best practice.
Okay.
So although, yes, it could certainly occur in that way, and we would be, we would be okay as far as, in a legal aspect. I'm not sure that would be best practice when we want to do what's best for students.
No, and I appreciate your feedback on that. I guess my question then is, how frequently has it, how you said as of recently that there have been moments in which staff didn't want to. Can you, and I don't want to talk about any specific case or any people or any staff, just scenarios.
Yes, ma'am. I can't speak specifically. I've not been a part of every, IEP meeting, so I've not gotten all that information back. I just know there were a couple of IEP meetings where there were some concerns about teachers feeling uncomfortable being recorded during sessions.
Understood. So I guess and thank you so much for that. I think in totality, I can recognize that some of these can get challenging, and there's a lot of emotion and passion in them. But again, for us to ensure that we're doing exactly what the law is requiring us to, and then go above and beyond to serve our families and ultimately our students, and ensure that we're providing the highest quality education and build that trust, I'm concerned that as we have moved forward, when we are trying to move past and elevate our responsibility and the perception. I mean, whether some of it's
excuse me, Bridget. We've heard your reasons and your
No, excuse me. We work on
this is the whole board that needs to discuss
I will yield my time. We do Robert's Rules of Order here. I don't want to be cut up. I will conclude shortly, but this is an important topic of which I've done a substantial amount of research.
I know you did.
Thank you. So before I was interrupted, my point is that I want to make sure that when we are moving forward, that we are not taking 2 steps back. We're not going to say we want to be the best, we want to do this, and then take away something that has benefited families in this community for a long time. It sends a very chilling message that we are saying one thing but doing another. And so I wanted to highlight all of those areas because of the other hurdles that may have been highlighted as reasons why we could not go forward with a formal policy of allowing recordings. And thank you for addressing all of my questions. I yield the floor.
Thank you. Now, other board members can have input. Ms. Goodwin.
We are doing what we are legally required to do, correct, Tammy?
Yes, ma'am.
We are doing things properly, and as a result of that, this year we've really had no incidents of suits, and we've had, 8,500 IEPs?
Correct. Close.
And perhaps this recording would be very beneficial to the family, but it also might be involved for someone who's looking for business from a case outside of that who might look to be an advocate for that student. Is that correct? Probably so. You don't have to answer that. And I think that's where Mrs. Zucker, I'm sorry, she must be thinking of me at this minute. I think that's where Bridget may be getting some of her information about these cases is from the people on the outside who are serving some of the students. I've heard a lot of information from them. I saw comments yesterday in the paper that one of them made about the DJ case. We're still going back to the DJ case. God knows we could have done better. I wish we had done better, but we've passed that by now, and we have a great attorney that works with us on ESE cases. Patrick, did you work with our ESE attorney to develop these policies?
Yeah, so initially I worked with the superintendent, and it was important to get some options very roughly down for you all to consider in broad categories in order to facilitate this meeting. So since I have submitted them, I had a conversation, really emails with that particular lawyer as recently as about 2 hours ago that were very productive. And I think we certainly, depending on which way the board wants to go, can have legally compliant policies that are practical and that everybody will be comfortable with, and that, strike the proper balance between all of the various stakeholders, parents, students, and teachers.
Well, after my talking to staff and to teachers and to lawyers and attorneys and other school districts, they all say, no, don't change your policy. Not a good idea. So accordingly, I would say this. We are doing a great deal right now. We have a new person at every school, correct, Dr. Asplin, who now is in charge of ESE and has elevated this to a higher level. Is that correct?
Yes, each of the there's an assistant principal at each school who will be overseeing the ESE areas at their school.
Right. And we're making great strides in reaching out to and serving those students as they need to be served. And so for that reason, I don't see a need to change the policy, maybe to refine a policy, but I really didn't like the way this whole thing came about. We didn't talk about this at the board table. Getting 3 board members to say, yay, let's go forward and develop this new policy. It kind of happened at the end of a board meeting. And so for me, this is much ado about nothing. This is, perhaps a solution looking for a problem, and I don't see it as a problem. Now, if in fact we do some survey in the next year and we see that we have parents that can ask for this, we see parents that require this or need this, and Pat and Barry say, yay, it's a great idea, which I'm not at all sure that they have said that, but I don't know. I haven't talked to them personally about it. But if we have a consensus with the district and we have consensus with our teachers and our union and so forth, and we find that we need to do this, then I think we can always change the policy then, but I don't think it's necessary at this time.
Could I ask?
Yes.
Could I ask for clarification, Mr. Duggan, about if a parent is not able to access or has an impairment themselves, if parents have impairments themselves, what is the rule there?
Yeah, so we're required to permit recording when a parent, because of their condition, cannot meaningfully participate. Examples would be if someone were deaf and blind, but could later participate meaningfully through Braille. If they had a documented memory problem where beyond the words that are spoken out of someone's mouth, they can't remember. But going back and being able to listen to the recording later would permit them to meaningfully participate and make decisions on behalf of their child. That would be an example. It's hard to make a laundry list of all of the circumstances, but those would be 2 examples that I think we certainly would be required to minimally record in those circumstances. And certainly beyond that, as much as the board and all of the stakeholders agree to beyond that. But that would be the minimum legal requirements.
Thank you for addressing.
My goal here on IEP meetings with parents and teachers and the staff, because I do believe parents need to know and understand what's happening. And I believe those training sessions are helping in that, very much so. But I think it's also important that at those IEP meetings, that everyone is comfortable speaking. I think it would be wrong to stifle that speech for someone for fear that something they say may turn out to be a gotcha. I mean, I know Bridget says this isn't intended to be a gotcha, but I know that when I say things here, they get quoted out of context, and guess what? They're a gotcha. That's what happens. And I don't want teachers to be afraid to speak openly in these meetings. But what we want to do, because I do understand that some parents, even perhaps with the training, don't understand. And I think what we need to do then is perhaps look at, making sure that and maybe we do, maybe we don't, but I mean, is there an agenda that's prepared for this that lists what are the current services this child is getting? What is the status of this child? Has this child been improving? What are the proposed changes? What are the expectations? And we could send it out. This is what we're planning to do. And moms, here, we want you to do this also. And so here are those things. So if there's a proposed change and they put a line through it and say, oh no, we don't want that, or mom doesn't want that, or mom's got an expectation that we can't meet, that we could fill those. So that's the kind of, I think, meaningful help that we could do to make these IEP meetings more meaningful, more helpful to the parents. They need to understand what it is, what the status is of their child, and what it is that we're proposing, and what those expectations are of what these proposals are. But they also need to know what are the current services we're getting and what's the status of it. I mean, do we do something like that? I mean,
Yes, ma'am. There's a process in place, and the liaisons are trained to make sure that there's a clear, the IEP is set up in a certain way so that everything is very clear. Present levels drive the services, goals, accommodations. That drives the least restrictive environment. And yes, ma'am. And then there's a prior written notice that's included at the end if there are changes made to the IEP. And we also try to review that verbally to make sure that there's a clear understanding. So yes, ma'am, there is a process in place, and we also have the LEA reps, which are going to be the ESEAPs that Dr. Asplin spoke of. They will be trained on September 10th, and will receive LEA training from a renowned attorney coming up in September, which will be very beneficial and address all of the areas that you just spoke of, the importance of that.
Yeah, I would think, to me, a parent would rather have that in writing and understanding. Not only do they have it in writing, we're going to do this, but why we're going to do this and what we expect to happen from this. And then also, you were doing that, what did it do? You know, that kind of information is what they want. I would think that if we give them that, I think we are doing what we need to do. And we can talk all we want about gotchas, but I know in the DJ case, the information that we normally have that is confidential was given to newspapers. And then there were quotes in the paper. And as a school district, even if somebody is quoted, they can't respond to it because we still have that obligation of keeping that information confidential. So even if somebody else put it out there, we can't respond to it. And that makes it very, very frustrating. So maybe we don't intend it to be a gotcha, but sometimes when somebody is sitting there and wanting it recorded, and, because I think anytime, and unfortunately that's the world we live in today. When they bring advocates in, we go, all right, then we're going to get our attorney in to make sure everything is done correctly. And then the parent says, oh, wait a minute, the advocate's saying, well, we don't want that attorney there. So then we cancel the meeting, and it becomes this fight. What we need to do is answer the parent's questions. Tell the parent what we've done, where we're succeeding, where we need to make changes, and have it in writing. I would rather have it in writing in the language the person can understand. That's something important too. I mean, if this person is a Ukrainian that speaks Russian or Hispanic that needs it in Spanish, we need to put it in their language so that they understand it. And if we can do that, I'm happy going forward. We have Mr. Edwards.
So again, I'm going to start off by saying that I saw Ms. Rose had a quote in the paper this weekend, and I thought it was accurate. If it goes to advocates and I don't mean to misquote you by any stretch of the imagination, but if it goes to advocates and we're getting requests to record, then we miss the opportunity to build the rapport and develop the relationship. And that's really where I'm at. So what I recall is a very quick tail end of a conversation between Mrs. Ziegler and Ms. Rose about IEP recordings, and to my knowledge, when requested, it was accommodated. That was the information I heard at that board meeting, that it was accommodated. So I don't know that anything really has to change. We do that. I've gotten so many thoughtful emails from parents who talked and said, my husband couldn't be at the meeting, and so I'd like to have it recorded. That makes sense to me. That's a tool. But just automatically recording every one of them, I know that I've spoken to teachers. They are scared to death that they don't want it. So I think the way that we have it, where it's an accommodation, where And I would encourage, there's a couple of things here, like when Mrs. Ziegler talks about rebuilding trust. I think we basically have a good trust policy in the overall scheme of things, where we do 8,500 meetings. And as I visit schools and I talk to principals and I talk to teachers, the relationship at the school level between the parents and the teachers and the principals and the ESE teams are solid. I get that. Do we have areas of improvement? Yes, I've been doing my research too, and I've found areas where we can definitely improve. One of the other adjectives that got mentioned here was that the meetings can become procedural. I think that's horrible. I think that's the worst mistake possible if it becomes procedural, because then it does make it official, and I can imagine the emotion and the anxiety of everyone in that room, and especially the families, that we want to tamp that down. We want to try and make it as less procedural as possible. Maybe that's an area of improvement, but my opinion is that what we're doing seems to be working, and that we can do a better job to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a room with advocates asking for it to be recorded. That's my personal opinion. It seems to be working just the way it is.
Mr. Asplund? Dr. Asplund?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a few things on this. First of all, I know I'm going to reiterate a couple of things here, but I want to say I'm very proud of how we are moving forward in our district with our IEP teams and our ESC department. We're moving forward very well. As what's been said already, over 8,300 IEP meetings in our district. No new litigation this year. No new litigation. And we had one state complaint that we worked through. So I think we're doing a great job. I think we're moving in the right direction. We definitely always can improve. I'm never here to say that we can't. We can always improve, and we'll continue to do that. And I agree with Tom in that relationships need to continue to be built. I think, when you have an IEP meeting, I was looking at this email from a particular parent today, and I get it. The frustrations of wanting to help your struggling and perhaps misunderstood child, the nerve-wracking experience of attending an IEP meeting with all the people who are in there, and I've never been in one. I feel alone. It's overwhelming. Those are real, and I will tell you that in the IEP meetings that I've been in, I know parents feel that way. And what we need to always try to do a better job with, always, is helping people feel comfortable while they're there, explain to them who's in the room and why, have some donuts and coffee on the table, anything that we can do to help everyone understand that we're all here to help their child. So then when it comes to the issue of recording, when I look at that, I think, okay, we don't want to just overreact and start recording 8,300 IEP meetings every year if we don't need to do that. But I think there's two times when maybe you can, and that is, number one, if it's mutually agreed upon and everybody in the room is okay with recording, that's great. And I think the second one is, like what Patrick said, within the law, if there's some sort of impairment or some reason or some reason that a parent might need to have it recorded. And this email that I have that I was just reading states that, I wanted to remember how the conclusions were drawn because I can't remember things right off the bat, when I get home. And even though they get it in writing, sometimes it is good to have it as a recording. Every single IEP meeting is is written down. All the notes are written down. All the notes are discussed, and it is all signed by the parent. But there are times when it does need to be recorded based on what we said. I just don't think it needs to happen every time. I don't think we need a policy that says every single IEP meeting we're going to record. But I think we need to work our way through that in a sensible notion, and recognize the good work that our teachers do and our IEP teams do and support them. They work hard every day. They're trying to do what's best for students. But sometimes people just don't like to be recorded. That's just the way it is. And I know in talking with a person about a couple of IEP meetings, there was, one person, I said, well, why in the world did that person not want to record? And they said, well, because in the last IEP meeting, they did record. And then all of a sudden, they heard themselves on social media. And they said, oh, I'll never record again because I do not want that to happen to me again. And so I thought, okay, well, that's a pretty good reason. So if there's no really good reason to record and everybody doesn't want to record, then let's not record. Let's keep doing what we were doing and help our parents through the meeting. And then if there is a really good reason that it needs to be recorded, then we need to do that for what's best for the child. It's all about what's best for the child. And we need to make sure that we're thinking about that. So I don't want us to go way overboard either direction. I think there's somewhere in the middle there that we can, we can create some policy or not even have one, because I know right now we don't record unless it's mutually agreed upon or the letter of the law says that we need to. And it would probably be something like this email that I just read from this parent who is just so anxious and so overwhelmed, and it's so nerve-wracking that maybe in that case we do need to do that. So I think we need to feel our way through that and understand our parents a little bit and make sure that we're doing the right thing, but not make a policy that, I don't want to make a policy that ties our hands to where all of a sudden we can't be a little bit flexible in there. So that's just my 2 cents.
Dr. Asplin and perhaps Mr. Duggan could answer on the instance that you said that it showed up on social media. Apparently, right now we have nothing to say that this is a recording to be used for and shouldn't be released. I mean, because especially if somebody else, another child's name is, so is there something that maybe we need to say when a recording is made, that there are some uses that it can't be used for? Or
I think you can, but I don't think you can enforce that. And
Okay.
Patrick, you'd have to talk through that a little bit more. And if I can, just before you answer that, Patrick, the last thing I wanted to mention was, I know the words transparency and trust came up, and I honestly don't see this as transparency situation, because we write down every single thing and we talk with the parent and they sign it. I think the recording would be another step, icing on the cake maybe if they really need that. I get that. But as far as being transparent, I believe we are trying to be as transparent as possible and continue to build trust, and we want to do that. We want to do that. So I just want to make sure that I say that to everybody out there. We're trying the best we can, and we really want to be transparent. We really want to build trust. I just don't think we need to overdo the recording. That's all. Go ahead, Patrick.
So one thing that we haven't discussed is if in the event that we do enact a policy and permit recording to any degree, I think a best practice would be if the family records, the district records, so that there is equal footing to the extent that's possible. It's not entirely possible because when the district records something, it becomes what's known as an educational record. And given the discreteness of these meetings, that is a very protected record, and it is considered what's called under Florida law confidential and exempt from the public record laws. And we have an obligation as a district to maintain that record in a confidential way. Those restrictions do not exist with the family. It is much more difficult to regulate what happens to the family's tape. Essentially, the district would make a record and have very onerous restrictions on maintaining it for a certain time period and not releasing it and ensuring that it remains confidential. And those same obligations would not exist really whatsoever for the recording that the family made. And that's how things like that end up on social media. They're not restricted by the same rules that the government is in that context. Now, could you come up with some type of waiver or release? I mean, I guess it's possible to contractually have the family agree to, some type of release or game plan about what they're going to do with the records. But from a practical standpoint, I think it would be very difficult to enforce. They would have much less skin in the game than us. And not all of our parents, for lack of a better way to describe this, are wealthy enough to enforce a judgment against them, even if we were able to take action to enforce that contractual, agreement that we enter in with them, such as like a release or an understanding that they would sign before the meeting. So practically speaking, I think that they would have no rules to the game, and the district, certainly if we record, has very onerous rules to that game.
Thank you. Ms. Rose?
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. I'm a strong very, very strong believer that every parent should have every opportunity for advocacy that is available to them. And I believe that as a district that we support that. And that strengthens them and also strengthens us. And I have told parents throughout my close to 3 decades, as half of it as a teacher for exceptional student education, and the other half as a principal with a strong heart and passion for exceptional student education, that my expectation is that you are an advocate. In this particular venue, and in my quote, my intent was to only talk about my own experience, and once I state that, I want to validate others that are just as important. And my experience was very slim, that as a team that we got to a point where recording was requested. And in my experience, in those very limited occasions over 28 years, it was the result of a contentious nature where I feel like that I, speaking for myself only, that I have failed in leading that team to best practices in the greatest fruition and product for a child. Given that, the recordings were not comfortable or productive. That does not eliminate that we have recorded in this district, and it has been very productive. My belief is that we need to be open to everything our community tells us, and that community is everything from the students in our classrooms that often attend individual education plan meetings for special education, to the teachers that support them in the teamwork that comes with community and all the parents and community and resources and staff, etc. At the point at which someone gets uncomfortable, that productivity ends. So my proposal and belief is that we need to be open to recording and respect if there is a staff member, an individual staff member, that isn't comfortable with it because there is no good productive end to what that recording would be. So to me, it's back up, look at our practices, our relationships, and how we're going to support that child. So in conclusion, I support recording, because I got numerous, we all got numerous, and my perspective of those numerous emails and input for our community is they need to know that we're open to that, and I am, always have been as an individual and will be. I'm also extraordinarily respectful of an individual staff member and or a parent not wanting to be recorded, and it is of no productive use for the student, in my experience, to go any further. I have failed in the team I'm leading, and I need to back up and find where is our common ground in that collaboration. Thank you.
Bridget, and we are running out of time, and we have, I know, at least one really important thing on the agenda still.
So am I recognized?
Yes.
So a couple, just for clarity, I wanted to make sure we don't have a policy right now, and that's, if you want to take a step back, why this topic took place was because I think it's been reiterated here that, you know, many of ours did not require recordings. We're very successful. I would agree that sometimes, not everyone who sent over emails was the recording in a contentious element, but they provided value to them. There is going to potentially be that time, but and to Mrs. Rose's point of, no, if it's contentious, there is a learning opportunity to go back and say how can we fix this? This is going nowhere fast. But I see those as two options. At the end of the day, where this came about was historically, we were saying yes. I don't believe any of these policies would indicate we would record every IEP. It's only upon request that we, in a written, with a 48-hour notification, very similar to what had been before, but that we would allow that to take place, and that really was such so that we're not intermittently saying yes here and no here. Because I think that opens up us to liability, and I don't think it is the way we should go. I recognize there can be some concerns, and part of me thinking if there's someone who doesn't want to be a part of that, and very valid reasons perhaps, it's a really good, again, learning opportunity to understand why, what happened, because then we're clearly maybe not going somewhere fast. So we have an opportunity to understand from the staff member, and also an opportunity to try to remedy things with that family. But I think saying no, not at all, and taking more of a legal approach undermines the work that I think that we are doing in order to best serve our families and staff and for the outcomes of the students. So just to reiterate, I want to, the policy portion, if we say we want to continue what we're doing now, we don't have a policy, and that puts us at risk because it can be, handled at different times and at different places. And so, I don't want to take away the one opportunity that families feel that may provide them a balancing act. I do want to make a point, and I'm not going to use anyone's name, but I think it is disheartening to me that there are statements made up here about certain people who choose or any advocates, because again, if you think about the challenge that in the dynamics of an IEP meeting, that you have an advocate in there to try to help guide you, and that is just like the district has attorneys to help guide them, but you also have a ton of amazing professionals who really understand all of that. So I think it's discouraging to hear that certain people are doing this for a monetary outcome. I don't have any specific evidence, but I don't believe those who you're speaking of have made any money. We have attorneys that make money. No disrespect to Mr. Duggan, but I just think that that's just a poor way to go about things, and we shouldn't be discrediting people. We should be focused on the policy and the facts and what's going to be best for our community and our students. So moving forward, I just wanted to make sure there was clarity that it's not the direction to make every IEP be recorded, but that we would afford that option to families upon request, upon written request. That's the kind of the amble I think would make the most sense, and that would be something I would like to see us move forward with at a future meeting.
For clarity, Dr. Asplund, right now, if a parent requests the recording, the parent, if everyone else in the room agrees to it, and I guess that's like Chapter 934, where the state requires dual consent if on recording. So you have a right not to be recorded currently. But if unless somebody stands and says, wait a minute, no, I don't want this recording, we allow that recording.
Tammy, you can answer this. I know you're involved in those much more than I, but it's my understanding that yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Normally, it comes to our attention prior to the IEP meeting. I don't want it to appear that we are sitting around the table and someone says, I'm not interested, because, we wouldn't want to do that. But normally, we receive a request prior to the IEP meeting, and then I believe there's a discussion, with the IEP team.
And then I think Ms. Rose made the comment that, wait a minute, if it's confrontational, if there's an issue going on, it's more than just recording. There's something going on with the way we're working this. Let's step back and fix the problem. Let's not, because I think when you start recording, you start demanding, no, I want this recorded, even if that person doesn't want it. Then you are starting a confrontational process. And I think she's right. We do need to step back and fix that confrontation. And let's look at what's in the best interest of the students. I also think that if we want to, because if we were to do this, I think it affects more than just us and the staff. I mean, I think when we make a policy of this magnitude, we probably ought to have a way that that we don't just write it and then vote on it. I mean, that we get input from the community. Do you want this? Now, we've got a very short meeting coming up. I think perhaps we ought to follow what, FSBA showed us to do a policy. If you're going to be having a policy like this, you have a meeting unjust that policy, and you discuss it and you give parents and teachers and staff time to give input. That's part. I think we need to look at the whole policy thing. Because I would like to say the first thing is, well, let's see what other districts are doing. Let me see what their policy is, rather than us having to come up with new policies and spending attorneys' money drafting policies and all of this. Maybe there's a better way of doing that. So if we were to go on this, I would at least want to have another a workshop. Doesn't do it, because we don't let people speak at workshops. I think we need to be looking at our procedures and talk about how we're going to go forward on something like this. But currently, anybody who wants a recording can get a recording, unless somebody, stands up and, use their Chapter 939 right to not record. And hopefully we will go back with what Ms. Rose said and fix it. I see, Bridget, you're asking again? No? Or you're...
Thanks for the side comments, but I don't have my marker on. Thank you.
Oh, I must not have taken it off. Sorry. So does anybody want to, Ms. Rose?
Thank you, Mrs. Brown.
Excuse me. Let me extend the meeting for 10 minutes.
Extraordinarily sensitive subject. We're talking about the most valuable asset that we possess, and that's the student. And when I say possess, I mean hold the responsibility to provide successful pathways, and engage our parents in every advantage that they can have. We're at a place right now where we need to have significantly more conversation. I am extraordinarily pro-parent advocate, community advocate, staff advocate, you name it. And I think that we can get there and go there. I think that when we talk about a policy that forces people to a place that I'm going to own, only me, as having been a school-based person, that my practices did not allow that IEP, individual education plan, to surround that child. And we're at the point where people are feeling uncomfortable, that we're not at a success place. We're not at a advocate, advantage everyone, because it is a collective team. We are a community. We are teachers. We are parents, we're community members, organizations, we're all those pieces. Do I think we can resolve this? Yes. I know that we have an ESE committee. I know that we're in a process and we need to take full advantage. What I also know is that at the point at which someone feels uncomfortable, we're not at that optimal point to advantage that child. So I can't ultimately say record and there's nothing else. And that's not meant to disrespect any child or any family member. It's meant that we need to dive in deeper. And I also know that there are recordings that have occurred that weren't contentious at all. So this is a huge piece with our students who need us the most at the center, and we've got a lot of work to do with it. So I just needed to clarify my piece, because when you talk about something so sensitive as the value of every one of our children, particularly with special needs, that's going to take a great deal of work. Thank you.
Could we get information on, all right, I hear there was over 8,000 meetings. In those meetings, how many requests were there for recording, granted and not granted? And as Ms. Rose said, if they weren't granted, why not, and what steps were taken to resolve any issues? Is that a reasonable request, or is that something you can do for us?
Yes, ma'am, we can do that. We can.
And I don't want to say this on my own. I mean, I
would welcome that.
The board would have to agree to be telling you to do something. Is this something?
Yes, we'll certainly get some more input. And based on what we heard, take all the information that we heard today, gathering more input from what you just talked about, talking with teachers, talking to the union, talking to the principals, talking to parents. I think we need to do some more of that to really understand what the issues are. And back to what you were saying, Ms. Rose, I think you're right on. In a situation where you're going to, or if I'm in a position where I have to make a teacher sit there and be recorded, you're not going to get much out of that teacher, and it's not going to be what's best for the child as far as the conversation is concerned, and so we don't ever want to see that. So we need to figure out how we're going to build those relationships, keep that going, turn a contentious situation into a very good situation. And then if recording needs to happen, we need to figure out, Patrick, what are those particular areas that would require a recording. There might be different reasons, and I know the law has different wording, but what does that mean? And so we need to look at that very, very carefully to do what's best for the student, and then talk to our people who are on the leadership teams or on the IEP teams and make sure they understand, in this case, we really need to record because da-da-da-da-da-da-da, not just because somebody wants it, and so we need to really look at that closely and take this input, and then we can put something else together and then come back later.
I think that's a good idea. We've got 5 minutes left of our extended meeting, and I know that we've got an important issue that we need to discuss, and that's that Motorola contract. I don't know if we've all talked about it yet, but we have to sign it today.
Mr. Dumas is online, I believe, and he's
still there?
Yes. Jody, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
There you are. Yes.
Hey. Hey, everyone. Thank you, board members. I apologize. Under the circumstances, the only way I could meet with you today. But yeah, if you recall, a couple of months ago, the original Motorola contract for just a hair over $5 million was in front of you, which you approved, and that was for the rollout of our P25 radio system. The original budget on that rollout was $7 million, but it came in just a hair over $5 million with the Motorola contract. Our Safety and Security Department has rolled out all of the P25 radios to all of the school sites. The remaining pieces on the contract are to make sure to be code compliant with fire code right now, we have to make sure that we have certain radio coverage across all of our buildings throughout the district. And we have some buildings where, in order to achieve that goal, we have to install repeaters. Under the original contract, the design of those repeater systems was for a 1-hour fire rating. In conversations with the fire department, this is very new code. All of the local fire chiefs and the inspectors have sat down and interpreted what that means. And the recent interpretation basically says to us that we can't have a 1-hour rated system. It has to be a 2-hour rated system. That caused us to have to redesign how we are installing these repeaters in schools. And so, for example, one of the schools that's going to require some repeaters is Venice High School. And the main control boxes for these repeaters have to go in our IDF or MDF rooms. In order to achieve a 2-hour rating, that would be very, very difficult in existing rooms because there are penetrations all over the place. So the design team got together, and what we're going to do as a solution is we can purchase basically 2-hour rated enclosed boxes that the controls for these systems will go in. That will achieve our rating that we need to get code compliant. But then that also requires us, with all of our conduiting in the buildings, to make sure that we're running conduit that's 2-hour rated. So there are a number of upgrades that we have to do to the side of the house, to the side of this contract, to make sure we are installing these repeaters that are 2-hour rated. So that's the reason we're coming to you for an increase. It's not an increase in the total budget allocation. It's just an increase on the contract with Motorola that we're looking to achieve. And again, apologize for the timing, but timing's critical. As you know, we're opening school in a couple of weeks. We've got the radios rolled out, and where we can be as compliant as possible to start school is kind of our goal. So that's really why the timing is on the workshop today. And again, I made individual calls to all of you to kind of explain this, but then it's on the agenda for this afternoon to approve the additional money to Motorola. So in summary, not over budget, but certainly asking for more money on the Motorola contract to make sure we're code compliant with fire code in terms of the repeater systems for the new P25 radio rollout. So with that, I'll open it up and entertain any questions.
Any questions? Okay, and this is for safety reasons, so that those people on the ground can communicate with one another and through like walkie-talkies. And I think we've explained that, so we've done what we needed to do. Thank you, Jody. And with that, there was another thing on the agenda, and that was operating procedures. And we've thought we might run over, so we've put it on to the next workshop agenda on the 3rd. And one of the things we will be talking about on operating procedures is how to move forward with policy changes like this. So perhaps there's a way that we can bring the public in the workshop part so we can get input at that time too. With that, we stand adjourned until 4 o'clock, where we will re-adjourn for a meeting. For the meeting, we're going to adjourn the workshop. Thank you.